This episode of Q Point Podcast is pre-recorded, produced and sponsored by Karina Quirk, broker at Next Home Experience.
Different views.
I know your story.
From different cues.
Incredible job.
He's David Quirk.
You brought it up.
And she's Karina Quirk.
Imagine.
This is
Q Point.
Now joining us in studio is State Representative Laurel Libby. Welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's been a few months since we've talked to you.
It sure has.
Well, as a matter of fact, it has been 5 months since you joined us, 1 week before the whirlwind.
Before everything went nuts.
Tell us, what was that stretch like for you?
You know, it was both the slowest and the fastest 5 months of my life, I think. Time seemed to creep by, but then also fly by. We had the post, and then a week later, I was censured. The lawsuit to get my constituents' voice and vote back. And all the while, session was, of course, ongoing. And so there was a lot going on at the same time. It has felt like 10 years has gone by.
At that point, there was a lot of votes that were close with one or two, right?
Yeah, there were a number of roll calls that I was not allowed to vote on when I was barred from voting before the Supreme Court weighed in that were close. There were a couple that were, maybe one vote. I don't know that I could claim that we lost any specifically because of my vote, but I would say this. Part of our jobs as legislators is to speak to the issues as well. And the fact is, I was not able to speak to any issues on the floor whatsoever after February 25th. And I think that's a huge disservice to the legislative process and to my constituents who weren't able to have their voice heard via my voice for those 5 months.
So after the censure, and you're walking around the State House, what was the atmosphere like?
Yeah, it was interesting. It was dependent on who you talked to, right? We had Democrat representatives who had all voted to censure me, who, by and large, even those I'd had pre-existing relationship with, really wouldn't acknowledge me for the duration of this session. And then I'd speak to different lobbyists, and the prevailing opinion there, even from Democrats, was what on earth is going on? I think that they expressed that by and large, they thought that the Democrats had done the wrong move politically and legally. And of course, they weren't going to say that out loud, but that was what I was hearing in the background from Democrats and Republicans alike. And then I would hear these quiet things from folks who either worked for the state or even the state house, and I won't go more specific than that, saying, thank you for speaking up. We support you, and we can't be public about it, but we appreciate what you're doing and what you stand for because you're standing up for those of us who can't.
During that period, how did you stay connected with your constituents? I know that you were on your social media pages, but in addition to that, what were you hearing from them?
I heard from my constituents regularly. I was getting phone calls, not just from within Maine by and large and across the country, but from my district, from constituents and emails. I send out a weekly email and I hear back from a lot of folks in response to that email. I do a lot on social media. And I would get messages every time I did a live, asking questions or following up on the issues. And I heard from, I would say, hundreds of constituents throughout those 5 months. And 90%, positive, thank you for your stance. Thank you for speaking up. Please keep fighting. Don't back down. Keep speaking the truth. Keep fighting, whether they're talking specifically about girls' sports or free speech. Their right to have representation, the challenges to the Constitution that my censure was, they were supportive. And it was great to see that from the district. And I heard from a lot of folks I hadn't heard from before. I have constituents I hear from regularly, and I love that. And I have gotten to know them over the last 5 years as I've served. But I also heard from a lot of new folks that I hadn't necessarily talked to outside of knocking on their door. And it was great to make those new connections and hear from folks and know better how to serve them in Augusta.
During the past 5 months, what surprised you the most?
5 months ago, what surprised me the most was that the Democrats actually censured me. I think it was a bad move politically for multiple reasons, one of which being that Maine people don't support biological males participating in girls' sports, but also because Maine people do support the Constitution. And I heard from even liberals in Portland or longtime Democrats in CD1 who said, gosh, we don't really recognize our party in Augusta. because of what's going on. We support free speech and we support you, and we don't recognize our party.
Can you tell us about the last day in the legislature and the recent headline related to the AG and Laurel Libby agree that it's moot on the censure?
Sure. I would say that headline's not 100% accurate, but what headline ever is, right? On the last day of session, it was about 4:30 in the afternoon, and we suddenly had an email in our inbox with supplement number 33, and that simply means that there's some new business for us to transact in the House. And this new business was a House resolution that restored my voice and my vote. Now, we had not known that this was coming, and that was a deliberate move by the Democrats. Of course, you should know the backdrop here that before we went to the First Circuit Court and had oral argument in early June, we offered to the Democrats, we said, look, we know we're winning. It is clear. The Supreme Court has essentially said so. We are winning this court case. And if you restore my voice and vote, then we won't take this any further. They declined that offer at that point. And I am convinced that they already had this in mind, to restore my voice and vote at the end of session when my constituents had been thoroughly disenfranchised. And so that is indeed what they did. They voted, most Democrats voted to restore my right to vote and to speak. Of course, that was the last half hour of session. And unlike when we offered it prior to the oral argument, and it would have restored my rights for the last month, and ensured my 9,000 constituents had full representation, they did it at the very end when they'd already manipulated the court system and disenfranchised an entire district. So following that passing, the Attorney General submitted a letter to the First Circuit Court of Appeals where our case is still pending and said, look, the legislature restored her rights and this case is now moot. Our response, having had communication between the attorneys following that letter, that the speaker guaranteed that I could not be recensured for the same thing. Now, that leaves some gray areas, right? Following that communication, we then filed with the court and said, okay, we won't contest your assertion that it is moot. Now that my constituents have their constitutional rights back, we won't contest that. But we do ask that you tell the district court to essentially make moot, to remove their initial ruling, so that the only ruling that will remain is the Supreme Court ruling, which declared, no, you can't strip her vote, and ensured that that question was answered as far as my district having to have representation. So that is still pending. We will see what the court does. We are going to insist that the district court does have to vacate that ruling. And so if they simply ensure that that happens, then we won't have to take it any further. But if they do not, then we will have to continue to fight.
So at least by the end of the day, you had time to vote on the new budget with all the new taxes in there. How did you think that went?
Well, I think it went pretty abysmally for the people of Maine. I was able to vote on all of the bills that came before us after May 20th. So I was able to vote on the budget. I, of course, voted no. I think it's a terrible budget that's going to harm Maine people. It has a variety of new and increased taxes, and it increases spending in ways that we don't need here in Maine. Look, when the Democrats came into power, when Mills came into power at the start of her term, she had a budget handed to her that was $7.1 billion. Okay, $7.1 billion. That's a lot of money, but that's a small amount of money compared to what they've increased the budget to. We are now at $11.6 billion and growing. I guarantee you it's going to be over $12 billion by the time this term ends. And that means that at this point, the Democrats have increased the budget in 6 short years from $7.1 billion to $11.6. That's 65% increase. My budget hasn't increased 65% at home. I don't know a single Mainer whose budget, what they're spending on groceries, on gas, on, electricity, their costs have gone up, maybe by 65%, but not by their doing. And certainly salaries haven't increased at that pace. So the reckless spending in Augusta continues with this supplemental budget, and there's no end in sight as the Democrats have pet projects they want to fund. And they will fund them on the backs of Mainers, whether it's the new streaming tax, the cigarette tax, the tobacco tax increase, any of the other myriad taxes. They're increasing taxes on retirees in this budget. They'd even floated the ambulance and hospital taxes, which fortunately did not make it into this budget. But good golly, you're going to start taxing sick people more to ensure that you can pay for your various wants list. That is crazy.
If you're just tuning in, this is Q Point Podcast. I'm Karina Quirk, co-hosting with my husband, David Quirk, and we are having a conversation with Maine State Representative and potential gubernatorial candidate, Laurel Libby.
Speaking of hospitals, what do you think about all these hospitals and birthing centers closing?
It's interesting watching the Democrats try to spin it like this is something new with the big, beautiful bill passing, which hasn't actually made impact yet. When we've had hospitals and birthing centers closing for years now, particularly picking up pace in the last 5 years because of the Democrat policies, the healthcare policies that they're passing at the state level. Now, there's blame to go around state and federal level and has been for years. And that, frankly, at the federal level is regardless of party. But let's talk about the state. We have things that we could do here to improve our healthcare apparatus. A number of them are repeal certificate of need. That's a bill that I have put forward every session that I have been in. It would increase availability of healthcare while lowering the cost. And who doesn't want to see that? Well, I can tell you who, the Democrat majority in Augusta. Healthcare price transparency. That's another bill that I put in. That one actually almost made it across the finish line, and then the Democrats killed it. Why? Because they wanted to fold it into a Democrat bill so that they could get the credit. Now, I don't care who gets the credit, but they did take out the biggest piece that would have made the impact, and that would have been for Maine people to have a private right to action if there was not healthcare price transparency. So that one sort of passed, but not with enough teeth to actually help Mainers. Then, you look at other things like insurance mandates. The Maine legislature passes insurance mandates, mandating that insurance cover certain things, whether it's infertility treatments or HIV drugs or whatever they might pass and mandate that insurance covers it. That drives up costs for Mainers. And then, of course, the biggie is the fact that they have expanded MaineCare so drastically. Maine doesn't pay its bills on time to our hospitals. And so Maine hospitals are stuck in this awful position. It is not a good business model of having to provide care to folks on MaineCare, which is a third of our Maine population, and not getting paid back for it. And when they are paid back for it, it's for a fraction of the cost of the services that are provided. And so guess what? The costs of healthcare for everyone else go up to subsidize MaineCare. It's a mess all the way around. All of those things are fixable, but not with the current majority.
So what are your thoughts on our current education system in Maine?
Oh, goodness, where to start? Well, according to House Speaker Ryan Fecteau, our only issue in the education system is that Maine kids are poor test takers. I would venture to say that's a pretty uneducated viewpoint that doesn't look at the real issues in our state. We've got the lowest test scores in 30 years. Our 4th and 8th graders are showing that they cannot read or do math at grade level. The majority of students in 4th and 8th grade. We are ranked 43rd in the country for test scores for these students. And that's pretty abysmal considering where we were back in the 90s and how Maine students have fallen in the last 30 years. And what you have to take into account at the same time is that we are spending more money as a state on education than we ever have in our history before, right? We're meeting the 55% of state portion paying for education. And people know that their property taxes are through the roof. Education budgets are increasing in just about every town and municipality, and that means property taxes go up. People are suffering under the weight of this, and we're not seeing the benefit for it. I think it'd be one thing if people are going, wow, we are top in the nation. Our students are excelling. They're all performing at grade level. And no, our students are not learning is what this says. If your student in 4th and 8th grade, 2/3 of them are not performing at grade level, you got a problem. So there are a number of things that need to happen. The primary is that parents need to be put back in the driver's seat. And what does that look like? Well, how we assign kids to school is arbitrary by zip code, and it's discriminatory. If you have a kid that lives in one zip code but is better suited to receive an education from a different school district, why the heck can't you send them to that town as long as the parent's willing to provide transportation? So that's a bill that I submitted this past session. Of course, that was killed by the Democrat majority. They don't want parents in the driver's seat. They want to keep the current system as it is, despite the fact that it is not working, and simply try to pour more money into it. We can see that that is not working. It's a very definition of insanity to keep doing the same thing and expect different results. So we've got to change the way that we're operating the system if we want to see better results for our students.
Speaking of property taxes and electricity and everything else going on, it's getting harder and harder for businesses to survive. And I know we're the oldest state in the United States. How do you see things changing around on that, trying to get young people to stay in the state?
Well, listen, I'm not trying to pick on House Speaker Ryan Fecteau, but it was interesting hearing him say on the radio last week, talking about our economy and our economy compared to New Hampshire's economy. Listen, New Hampshire's economy is booming and they are doing things right. They've got businesses that are thriving. They do not have an income tax. They do not have a penalty on work. And so folks are thriving. Businesses are thriving in New Hampshire. We need to see the same thing here. This last session, I submitted a bill to repeal the income tax. I know there's been a lot of talk about lowering the income tax from time to time. I think we need wholesale change here in our state. And that starts with not penalizing work, but rewarding it instead. And I think that is going to help change the trajectory where we're no longer the oldest state in the nation. We are quite literally the oldest state in the nation, the oldest population. And that means we're low on workers comparatively. And so businesses are struggling to find folks to do the jobs that need to get done. And that's going to continue as long as we are continuing to pass policies that push our young people out of our state. They're finishing high school, they're going off to find school or careers in other states, and they are not coming back. We need to create an environment where entrepreneurs can thrive, where businesses are rewarded for succeeding instead of penalized, and where people want to come to start a business, to grow a business, and they can find workers to do just that.
What do you think about the bill that passed to increase income tax to 8.95 that didn't make it to the budget?
Yeah, that was pretty sneaky. So the House and the Senate did pass this bill, but before it went to the governor's desk for signing, there was clearly some sort of communication that went on because it ended up getting sent back to committee. So what that means is this bill was carried over to the next session next year, and it is still alive. It's sitting down in the taxation committee. And look, this would be terrible for Maine. We're already the fourth highest taxed state in the nation. And this would raise the highest income tax in our state from, I believe it's 7.15% at this point, to 8.95%. Gosh.
Well, when you add in the 1% for the Paid Family Leave Act, that brings us up to 9.9%.
Yeah, so add these all together, right? The fourth highest tax state in the nation is prior to the 1% Paid Family Leave Act tax, and it's prior to any increase to the income tax. Look, the answer is not to keep taxing people more. We have a spending problem in our state. And we have a spending problem in our state is not everyone. It's Augusta Democrats who want to spend more and more money. As we talked about, bringing our state budget up from $7.1 billion to $11.6 billion in just 6 short years. That is completely unsustainable. And whether you're looking at the increase to the tobacco tax or this proposed increase to the income tax, none of the above are acceptable because they're just going to need more and more as we continue on this upward trajectory of spending. And that income tax bill, it is still alive. The governor clearly wasn't pleased with it and vetoed a similar bill last year. But the fact that it is now malingering in committee does concern me. I don't think that she would sign it in an election year next year in 2026. I think that would be certain political suicide in some districts. But there's no guarantees as this insatiable appetite to eat up more of your money persists in Augusta.
If you're just tuning in, this is Q Point Podcast. I'm Karina Quirk, co-hosting with my husband, David Quirk, and we are having a conversation with Maine State Representative and potential gubernatorial candidate, Laurel Libby. Another bill being held until January is LD 1971, which would restrict local law enforcement from communicating with ICE. What are your thoughts on that?
I think this bill has incredibly far-reaching consequences, and Governor Mills has understandably been reluctant to sign it. You know, I made the comment many times now that Governor Mills is the most moderate Democrat in Augusta, and I would say not signing this bill at this point is another reason that I say that. The inability for local law enforcement to communicate with federal resources has far-reaching consequences. And I think that it is very short-sighted of the Democrat majority to pass a bill like this. Look, it's a bill with a political agenda to score points with their base rather than look at the practical concerns of crime and safety in our state. And I do not support bills that are simply put forward to make political points like that are going to harm Mainers in the long run. Look, our state, I think folks would agree, our state safety for Maine families and individuals has plummeted in the last decade. And passing policies that says that state and federal resources cannot communicate regarding illegal immigrants is not good for our state.
Before we let you go, you have stated that you're exploring a run for governor. What are the top concerns that you are hearing from Mainers right now?
Mainers are very independent, strong-willed, smart people who are concerned about the things that affect them in everyday life, right? The pocketbook issues, the things that come at us every day. And sometimes we don't realize how much of that is affected by what's going on in Augusta, yes, in the legislature and who's serving in the Blaine House, more than it is at the federal level. You know, we pay attention to the big top-line politics, but really it's the things that are going on in Augusta that affect us at this very everyday level, whether it is the policies passed in Augusta that are driving up the cost of electricity and hurting businesses, families, and individuals, or the huge budget we've talked about that is increasing the money coming out of folks' pockets, their wallets, every single payday and making it hard to pay for groceries. I think these everyday concerns are a significant part of why I am exploring a run for governor. And the fact that we all want our kids, the next generation of Mainers, to thrive in this state. And look at what is going on in education. It is being dismissed entirely by the current Democrat majority and governor that our kids are not thriving. They are not learning. They are not getting prepared to lead this state as the next generation because of the disservice we're doing in the education system. So there are a whole lot of things we need to fix in this state. We need to ensure that Maine is a business-friendly state. Look at all these small business owners. You guys are business owners. That is the backbone of our economy, and yet that backbone is being crushed by the policies, by the excessive taxation and the red tape that folks are unable to navigate through. So that is what I hear about every day from constituents. And Maine doesn't have the same look that it had 20 years ago, 30 years ago. It's not the same state. You know, I was born and raised in Maine. I was born in Bangor, actually, right here where we are today. And we lived in a number of towns throughout Maine. My family moved a lot. We weren't military, but we moved around a lot. And so I saw small town Maine from the inside as I was growing up. I started babysitting when I was 8 and had my first job working at the local ice cream parlor when I was 14 and learned that Maine work ethic. We are independent-minded people, hardworking people. And we didn't grow up with a lot of money, but we had all of our needs met. And now here we are. I've got 5 kids. And we want to raise them in the same state where I walked home from the library with my pile of books and biked around the neighborhood with my friends. And our state has changed. It has changed a lot, whether we're talking about safety and the fact that I can't let my kids do the same thing in our neighborhood that I did when I was growing up, or education, where our kids aren't getting that same education that I did back in the 80s and 90s. We're having to really look at that for the future generation and look at what they're not getting. And businesses. I actually was thinking the other day on my run, I was thinking back to growing up and going to my dad's, he was a welder, workplace Christmas party. And how we would have these fun parties. And the highlight for us kids was the year that they gave us all Discmen. You guys remember running around with your Discman? Yeah. Oh, yes. Well, you know, it's interesting. Even as a kid, you can see that downward spiral of businesses no longer thriving like that, right? Healthcare costs were increasing over that next decade. The Christmas parties stopped. There were no more gifts. And costs started going up even then for our family. And it's only continued since. And we see that as we're raising our kids. And that's not the Maine that I want for our future. That's not the Maine that I want for my kids. I see a future right now where they're going to grow up and move out of this state and not come back. And that's devastating as a parent. I don't want that future. I want my kids here. I want my grandkids here. So I think it is our responsibility. And if we want to pull it back from the brink, then we need a complete change in direction and new leadership. And I am actively exploring that idea of a run because we are headed the wrong direction and we need a complete turnaround.
Maine State Representative and potential gubernatorial candidate, Laurel Libby. Thank you so much for your time today. We do appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you. You've been listening to Q Point.
Follow us at qpointpodcast.com or on your favorite streaming app.
This is where you can get the news from the people who make the news.
Make sure to join us next time.
We hope you tune in.
Q Point Podcast invites candidates from all parties to join the conversation. The views, information, opinions, and comments expressed during this program do not necessarily represent those of the host, Q Point Podcast, associates, affiliates, and CQRE LLC.
Thanks for being a part of the conversation. Catch every episode at qpointpodcast.com or wherever you stream. Tune in and tell your friends.